Greetings all, and welcome to the third and final part in the 1/72nd scale Vespid Panther Ausf G series. In today's video, we're going to be picking up where we left off by weathering the tank, and at the end of this video, I will give my little review and my thoughts on this kit, and compare it a little bit to the Vespid one that I've previously done. I begin weathering the model by using Tamiya XF16 flat aluminium and a very fine brush to apply some metal chipping. I first dip the brush in the XF16 and then after I've done that wipe away some of the excess so that the paint is relatively dry when I dab it onto the model to help avoid the paint from flowing, which creates very soft shapes, when with metal chipping you generally want very hard and sharp kind of random blotches. I then apply the dry paint onto the edges of the tank and on other areas which are likely to receive chipping, such as the edges of hatches, on the roof and areas where the crew are likely to walk, the engine deck, any other exposed corners, and also on some of the larger armoured panels to create some random scratches. I also dab a fair bit on the raised bolt details and the trim on the wheels, and also on some of the random spots, although later I would tone the effect on the wheels down using a little bit of Vallejo buff. Once the metal chipping has dried, I then apply some Tamiya panel liner scent black over all of the road wheels to help highlight their details, add a bit of shade, and also create a little bit of a dirty, grungy look. I also apply panel liner all over the entire tank, both the turret and the hull. This is once again to highlight details, add a bit of weathering, and create some shading effects. As you can see, the panel liner does a really nice job to highlight all of the hatches and all of the lovely details that are moulded into the Vespid kit. However, it is a bit too dark, but fortunately, since I used acrylic paints to paint the camouflage and do the chipping, I can use some enamel thinners to wash off the excess enamel wash without removing any of the paint below. If you painted your tank with enamel, you'll probably want to put some sort of varnish or layer to protect it from the enamel wash, or maybe use acrylic washes or even oil-based ones. As you can see, once the panel liner is fully dried, I then use a brush to apply some enamel thinners, and then use it to help remove some of the excess panel liner from some of the large areas to help make less of a dark effect, and also to get it to flow into some of the areas where there are more details. I also use a bit of paper towel sometimes to remove the excess when there's too much for the paintbrush to deal with, and I repeat this process until eventually I'm happy with the final result where the tank does not look like it is too darkly shaded and all of the details are nicely exaggerated by the panel liner. Once the thinners have dried, I then get out some Vallejo mud and grass dirt effects, and using a cocktail stick I apply it onto the model to create the effect of dirt and grass that's built up on the tank over time as it's driven off-road. The areas I apply it to are mainly in between the suspension arms where the running gear would build up a lot of the dirt and it would be tricky for the crew to remove, on the bottom of the tank, and also on the front mudguard. Since I wasn't going to do side skirts, I also built a little bit up on the sides of the tank. With the build-up of dirt applied in between the suspension arms, I could now build the road wheels without them getting in the way. Unlike the Vespid kit, the road wheels in this tank are a lot more complicated and more German-like to assemble.
Volkswagen, das Auto.
There are 16 individual road wheels on each side of the tank, with 4 on an inner row, a set of 4 where you join 2 halves together and stick them on the middle, and then there is another 4 for the outer row, and this is repeated on the other side. It's a little bit fiddly, but provided you have the instructions and don't put too much pressure on the road wheels as you put them in place, it's not too tricky to assemble. However, speaking of tricky, after the 32 road wheels had been attached to the tank, it was then time to apply the tracks. The tracks themselves are made out of hard plastic, but fortunately this means the details are really quite nice and you can also bend them quite easily to shape and they will stay there, unlike other types of materials such as the plastic rubber band tracks, which are really tricky to do. There are some links that have to be glued together to create some of the curves and complex shapes, but for the most part these track sections come as moulded sections, which can easily be glued to the running gear. I found that all of the track parts fitted pretty well and with no gaps, although it was a bit fiddly to try and get some of them into positions once the upper hull had been attached to the tank. The instructions do recommend you do this prior to assembling the tank's hull, however this makes weathering like I do much harder, and I also don't really see how it would make things much easier because the sides of the hull come moulded to the bottom, so they would still get in the way anyways. Nevertheless, I still managed to tweeze it into place even the most stubborn sections of track, and on the whole I was really happy with how they came together and also how they look once assembled. I then magically assembled the opposite side using the power of video editing, before using some deluxe material CA glue to glue the resin infrared sight onto the commander's cupola, and then I got out some Vallejo buff and painted the accessories I had on the sprue, as well as the infrared sight. I painted the lamp and the sight for the infrared system XF16 flat aluminium, and while it was drying I created some extra little wires out of some spare plastic material and glued them into place to add some extra detail. I found there was a little bit of a shine on some of the decals, so I decided to use a little bit of matte varnish to soften them up, and then I glued the accessories which I painted off camera on the sprue onto the vehicle. The only exception being the canister, which I believe contains the gun cleaning equipment, which I painted the camouflage pattern for once it was applied to the vehicle. The infrared sight and accessories all received a wash of Paneliner scent to highlight their details, and then I applied some Tamiya water-based pigments to create some rust effects on the spare track links at the back of the vehicle, and also to add some little rust spots on some of the metal chippings. I also used some of the lighter shades of brown pigments to add some dirt onto the road wheels, and I used the black pigments to create some exhaust and gun smoke effects. All of the vision slits for the cupola and the driver were painted X1 gloss black, and then I used a cocktail stick to apply even more of the mud and grass effects, this time onto the assembled tracks. One of the bigger challenges I faced was trying to find the correct colour for the infrared sight and its lamp. There aren't any coloured photos from the war, although I did manage to find one of a restored tank, which generally seems to be quite accurate, and most modeler forms agree that it was at least a bit of a bluish shade, but definitely on the darker side. I decided in the end to go with a nice wash of X1 gloss black over the top of both the sight and the lamp, and then the lamp received a coat of Tamiya X23 clear blue to give it a bluish tint. I then gave the lamp and the sight a coat of gloss varnish to make them a little bit shinier, and the final step for the tank was to add some Tamiya weathering pigments to create some dust effects streaking down the side of the vehicle, which were applied, and then the excess was removed with a damp fingertip, and with that, the Vespid 1/72nd Scale Panther Ausf G with the infrared sight was finally finished. And here you can see some amazing photos of this finished kit, taken by my good friend and fellow Queensland Air Museum model nerd, Riles Hubbard, so thanks a lot mate for these photos. Overall, I'm really happy with how this kit turned out. It had a lot of very fiddly small parts, and also the photo etch, which really pushed me to my limits. I'm really happy especially with the infrared sight. The effect I got was just what I was hoping for. It sort of appears dark in most of the photos. However, if you flash a little bit of light or take a photo with the flash on, you get a very nice sort of bright blue effect that appears to be coming out of it, so it really looks good in my opinion. Compared to the Zvezda kit, this is a lot more complex. It probably took me about 3 times as long to make this kit, but you can definitely tell the level of detail on this kit is much higher, and the track assembly also goes together really good, which surprised me a little bit. From my experience, kits that are in the same sort of price range from Revell, which also have the hard plastic tracks, don't tend to go together as well as this kit, so if you're concerned about that when buying this kit, don't, trust me, the tracks fit together really excellently. I would probably only recommend this kit, however, to people who've had a fair bit of experience with these models, just because of the photo etch parts are a little bit tricky. Even I probably didn't do the best, but hey, it's alright, you gotta learn at some point. And the sheer level of number of parts, as I've said, is quite high, so you definitely need a bit of experience to put this kit together and get a good one out of it. But for people who really love the Panther or want the very rare infrared sight version, I'd definitely recommend it. I've done a video on my channel previously where I put a 3D printed interior I designed into a 1/72nd scale T34 from Dragon, and at some stage I hope to do something similar with this kit, although I haven't started designing it yet, so it might be a little bit further down the line, but eventually that will come out. I've also got the SE Panther nearly finished, so there'll be a video coming for that pretty soon. Otherwise, however, thanks for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed it and got something out of it. If you did, please be sure to leave a like, and feel free to leave any suggestions or any questions in the comment section down below. A big shout out as always to my wonderful patrons for helping me buy these vehicles and also spend the time making these videos. Also a big shout out to the local hobby store on the Sunshine Coast, Tectonic Hobbies, where I happen to work and where I got this kit from at a slight discount. Thanks once again, and until the next video, model on!